talk about pearl origins and differences. I'm a great lover of pearls, and pearls go way back into history. So many famous people have enjoyed and worn pearls for centuries. So pearls are one of the organic types of gems that are used in jewelry. And when we talk about organic, we mean that it is a byproduct of something that either was living or is living. So it could be from animal or vegetable, but it originates from something that was alive. In the case of pearls, most pearls come from mollusks, and we have many different types of mollusks, but the ones that we mostly use are the ones that produce salt water. Salt water is produced from the oysters usually, and then we also have freshwater pearls, and those are typically produced from mussels. And there are quite a few different species that produce, but we won't go into all of the different species at this moment. What I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit about the difference between the natural saltwater pearls and also cultured, and we will also look at imitation, so we want to look at all of those different things. So let's start with natural saltwater pearl formation. What is it that happens? People tend to have this idea that a little grain of sand somehow gets into the oyster and then it irritates the oyster and it produces the pearl. Yes, that is the general idea of it, but it's not just it has to get in anywhere, and it's not necessarily just a grain of sand. It could even be a little parasite or a piece of coral or something has to lodge itself deep within the fleshy part of the creature. And when it does irritate that creature, the only thing that the little creature can do is to secrete its own substance, which coats the irritant and makes it less irritating. But of course, over time, you have to realize that the secretion actually crystallizes. And as it crystallizes, getting harder and harder, then it irritates the creature again. So it is going to secrete once more. And this is a consecutive thing. It goes on and on, secreting, crystallizing, until finally we get a decent-sized pearl. That being said, let's say it was to start from a little tiny grain of sand, which is, say, 1 millimeter in size. How long do you think it would take to get about a 6 millimeter pearl, something the size of a pea? Well, it could take easily anywhere between 10 to 13 years. So it's a very time-consuming process, and natural pearls are actually not something that are really common. They're not something you can find everywhere. In fact, we would say they're a real rarity. So if you want to see how rare natural pearls are, here's just one example. This beautiful strand you see on the screen was sold by Bonhams in London about 2013, and it sold for £194,500, which equates to around about 315 Singapore dollars at that time. So natural pearls are therefore going to be really costly, and they are going to be few and far between. So what is it that you actually see in the market when you go out and buy pearls, or when you're looking for pearls? What is it you're typically seeing? What you're likely to find is cultured pearls. Now, the cultured pearls can be saltwater or they can be freshwater, but let's just talk about saltwater first. So we can imagine taking the same type of oyster, but instead of just waiting to see what happens if it will create a pearl, man actually inserts a nucleus, and the nucleus is a very specific nucleus. It's called the pigtoe clam. It's usually coming from Mississippi and the Mississippi rivers and in the US, and this particular material is inserted into a very specific location, and it has to also be inserted with a little bit of the mantle tissue, which is the frilly kind of outer skirting of the soft fleshy part of the creature. And this was discovered back in the 1800s, and I'm sure you've all heard of Mikimoto. He did so much trial and error. He tried every kind of nucleus possible, and it took him practically a lifetime to find out that it was pigtoe clam that would actually work. And eventually he did succeed and did very well. And his mission, his aim, and what he wanted in life was to make sure that every woman would be able to wear a beautiful strand of pearls. And why was that? Is because before the 1800s, mostly all the pearls were natural. And if they were natural, therefore they were super expensive. And of course, only royalty and the higher ups could wear and buy pearls. So if we look at the process now, the culturing process that was originally developed by Mikimoto, he discovered that if you take that nucleus and you insert it into the right place with a little piece of the mantle tissue, then the same thing happens. It irritates the creature secretes a substance which coats it, and that substance crystallizes, and it happens over and over and over again. But of course, the main difference between the natural pearl and the cultured pearl is that the cultured pearl has this big nucleus in it. And when I say big, of course, it's going to depend on the oyster, the size of the oyster. Sometimes if you put something too big, you could very easily kill the oyster. In fact, only about 50% of oysters survive the process. So once that nucleus is in and the oyster starts to secrete, then it's going to produce something that looks extremely similar to a natural pearl. So the outer coating is exactly the same. And usually the cultured pearls have to be nurtured throughout this whole period. And what is the period? Well, usually around about 3 years is a good period to create a very reasonable thickness. It's not going to be anywhere near as thick as a natural pearl, but at least that's a wearable thickness around, a little more than 2 to 3 years. So we say that the nucleus is pig-toe clam. And as I said, Mikimoto tried everything, and he eventually found this pig-toe clam in the Mississippi rivers in the USA. And you can see here on the picture how they're actually sliced and cut and made into small cubes first, and then they're made into spheres in a tumbling machine, and then they're made in all different sizes, so that the person who is doing the culturing process, we call him the grafter, he would actually know by experience what is the right size for which oyster. So the most popular pearls are currently the Akoya. Akoya pearls are coming from Japan, and they tend to be quite small. They tend to be anywhere from 2 millimeters up to about 9, maybe 9.5. Not very many are 9.5, but it's pretty much 2 to 9.5 millimeters in size. And the actual oysters themselves are quite small. They're no bigger than the palm of a person's hand. So they usually produce mostly white. They can produce gray, they can produce a few yellows, but in general we see more whites with the Akoya, which are the Japanese variety. Then we also have very nice pearls coming from the South Seas, and the South Sea oysters tend to be much, much bigger. They can be even up to 5 times bigger than the Akoya. So therefore they typically produce much bigger sized pearls. The main difference between the Akoya and the South Sea, apart from location, is that we have 2 types. The 2 types would be the white group and then the dark group. And so here on the slide you can see the dark ones, the light ones, and when we say dark group, a lot of people call these black pearls. And it's okay to call them black pearls, but actually there are very few that are jet black in color. Most of them are just a dark body color, could be very dark gray, dark bluish, dark greenish. There are many darker colors, and those are just the dark group. Of the white group or the light group, we do have other colors too. We have some yellows. We also have actually 3 different grades of yellow. You have a light yellow, a medium yellow, and a dark yellow. You also have different shades of gray. Usually the white group or the light group has the lighter grays. And you also have some lovely champagne looking colors. Would we really call it champagne? It's just a little bit cream color or off-white color. So those are typically your South Sea pearls. Now those pearls are much, much bigger. They start at about 9 millimeters and they go all the way up to about 17, 18 millimeters. And a lot of people think that because they're expensive, and they're expensive because they're large, but because of they're expensive, people think that they might be natural. And South Sea natural pearls are as difficult to come by as the natural Akoya. So in fact, the majority of South Sea pearls today are cultured. And they're going to have the same pig-toe clam, which is the nucleus inserted into them. It's just a larger size. Usually the pig-toe clam for South Sea starts off at about 9 millimeters. Lastly, I want to just highlight that we can also have freshwater pearls. And with freshwater pearls, they can be in many, many different colors. They can be in many different shapes and many different sizes. And today, freshwater pearls can look like Akoya because they can also be produced perfectly round in small sizes. They can look like South Sea pearls because they can be larger sizes but still very nice and round. And they can also look like all kinds of things because, of course, in your Akoya and South Sea pearls, they're not necessarily all round. There's a lot of shapes that come into those different ones. They can come anywhere from round to symmetrical to baroque. So the freshwater pearls have more varieties of shapes, and they can come from very small to very large and in different colors. So with that being said, yes, most freshwater pearls are also cultured today. The system is a little bit different. It's not exactly the same. And the culturing is not done with the pig-toe clam for freshwater pearls. It's just done with a mantle tissue from the mussels. So here's another big difference. We said that the oysters usually produce the saltwater varieties of pearls, and the mussels usually produce the freshwater pearls. Great. Now, during the process of culturing pearls, people don't realize that it's quite a difficult thing to do and that it takes some time. In fact, there's a very long cultivation period, especially for the saltwater, which is the 3-year period, where you're only getting 1 pearl per oyster. Whereas for freshwater, you will find that the freshwater pearls are able to be more than 1 in a shell, in a mussel, and even up to, if they're very small, you can get 50 to 60 in 1 mussel. So that's a long cultivating period for the saltwater, lesser cultivation period for the freshwater. But during that time, there can be all kinds of pretty unusual things that happen. There can be typhoons, there can be red tides, there can be tsunamis, and of course today we have also pollution that is a big factor and causes a lot of hiccups during the process. So are all of the pearls going to come out really, really well? In fact, most of them don't. I would say that maybe around 2% or so are the finer quality, the highest quality. And the rest, there's a lot of other degrees of quality. So a lot of freshwater pearls, because the majority of them are white, they will tend to be dyed. So we do see a lot of treatments in pearls, especially with the freshwater. Also because they're less costly, and I think that it's very easy to take the less costly ones and to, especially if they're low quality, and just give them some very pretty colors. So anytime you see very strong colors in pearls, typically it's not the natural color, because most of the natural colors in pearls tend to be a little bit more subdued. Now, for the freshwater, you're also going to see that when we insert mantle tissue, that it's done in a very different way. I've said that you can get 50 to 60. Well, here's an example on a slide of several different pearls growing from the mussel. And even for freshwater, a lot of skill, expertise is needed to produce good quality material.
I hope you're enjoying the session that Tanja has put together for you, and I wanted to briefly let you know that if you want to find out more and really explore the world of jewelry in more detail, we have a fantastic course called Gem and Jewelry Trade Secrets. It's a 5-day comprehensive course that will let you take control over your purchases if you're a buyer or collector, or if you're a designer or maker, it'll help you better understand the gemstones that you're going to be using in your jewelry. And it is supported by the Singapore Government Skills Future initiatives, including grants of 50 to 70%, as well as the use of Skills Future credits. The program is taught by Tanja Sadow, and it is one of our most hands-on programs, because you're actually getting a chance to look at and handle over 1,800 gem and jewelry exhibits throughout the program. Now, in the first day, you'll be covering gemstone classification, colored gemstones, and you'll also be learning a lot about how to use the equipment that jewelers use to look at gemstones, things like loupes and lights and other things that we need as we're looking at all of the different gem materials. From there, we go on to day 2, where we deep dive into diamonds. We're going to be talking about how they're valued, also a little bit about synthetics and simulants, and really understanding kind of what tips and tricks we can use to identify these gemstones. Next, we look at pearls, and we talk about the freshwater versus the saltwater variety. We talk about where the saltwater ones come from, how they're cultured in order to be able to produce beautiful, consistent quality. And then we also talk about the many quality factors that are used to determine their value. We also talk about simulants, not synthetics. We talk about simulant pearl materials, and we also talk about ways in which you can identify them. So on day 4, we talk about phenomenal gemstones. And phenomenal gemstones are gems that have a fantastic and unusual reaction to light. And in there, we talk about all of the different types of phenomena, and we talk about how those affect value, as well as where you can find the best qualities, and you'll be observing a lot of these phenomena yourself. We also talk about jade on the 4th day, because jade is extremely popular in this part of the world. Not only do we talk about the traditional types of jade and their value and quality, we talk about jade imitations, and we talk about some recent changes in the classification of jade that people need to know about. And then finally, on the last day, we look at organic gemstones, things like amber and pearl and jet and coral and bone. All of these things make up an unusual world of gemstones that people don't normally think of, but that also people can derive a lot of pleasure from. From there, we look on to what's next, and that includes things like equipment and identification and valuation, and where you can go to really study those in more detail. And if you'd like to know more about the courses that we offer, please stay on at the end of the program.
So what other pearls are there on the market today? There are actually quite a few others. I'm just going to mention some of the ones that are becoming more popular. We have keshi, and keshi is typically a byproduct of pearl culturing. Of course, keshi in Japanese, it's a Japanese word, it means poppy seed. And the reason why it's poppy seed is because usually when they go in to look for the pearls that have been cultured, and they remove the cultured pearl that's from the oyster, they will go in and look around for anything else. And sometimes they will find some small hard lumps. And those hard lumps, which are very, very tiny, are made of pure conchyolin and nacre, which is the same thing that the pearl is made of, but without any nucleus. So what happens is that we can't really call those natural. You might say, but they don't have a nucleus, so yes, they must be natural. Yes, but had man not implanted the nucleus and made the creature create the little pearl, then those pieces would not have, they wouldn't have been there. So for that reason, we need to give them a name that's other than natural, and a good name was keshi, poppy seed, because they came out very, very tiny, very, very small. I don't know if you've ever seen the size of poppy seeds, but they're tiny. And then later, the word was used also for larger sizes, because in saltwater and South Sea varieties, what can happen sometimes is that when you insert the nucleus and the mantle tissue, it might actually happen that it will reject the nucleus. And if it does reject the nucleus, it could die, the oyster could die, or if it doesn't die and it still retains the little piece of mantle tissue that had been put inside with the nucleus, then it can still make a pearl using that. And those pearls tend to be a little bit larger, but they're still also known as keshi because it's a byproduct of the culturing system. Then I would like to talk a little bit about imitation pearls. Now, with imitation pearls, they date back to antiquity because even the Egyptians were producing glass and faience back in 3000 BCE. But that being said, mass production of imitation pearls started around the 16th and 17th century. And they were made from glass, they were made from all kinds of ceramics, and even later they were made from plastic. So some of these were very, very convincing. And today, people are often handed down pearls from their grandmothers and their great-grandmothers and so on and so forth. And it might not be very obvious initially that they might be imitation, but it could be. It could be because they're difficult to distinguish sometimes. Later, I'll give you an idea of how we distinguish them. Lastly, I want to talk about two very rare types of pearl for pearl collectors. We have the conch pearl, and the conch pearl is definitely natural still today at this point, and it is coming from the South Caribbean seas, and it's coming from the queen conch, which is a very beautiful shell, which is an endangered species. Now, usually only 1 in about 10,000 shells produce a conch pearl. And if that is the case, then you realize that they're not all large, and they're not all beautiful, and they're not all round. So to get a large, beautiful, round conch is something that is truly exceptional and is going to be very, very expensive. These queen conchs are actually fished, and they're used in, they're a delicacy. They're actually eaten. The flesh is eaten. So it's not that many people are going out looking for these and killing them specifically for the pearls inside. And then lastly, I would like to talk about the mellow very briefly. And this is over in this part of the world, which is Asia. The mellow tends to be a beautiful orange. It can be a yellow, it can be white. But typically the coloring tends to be more of the yellowish orange. And these are also very, very rare, and they're also natural. And both the conch and the mellow are coming from a slightly different place in the creature. For the other pearls we spoke about, for the Akoya and for the South Sea, usually the nucleus is implanted deep within the flesh into the gonad or sexual reproductive organ of the creature. Whereas for the mellow and the conch, it's typically more forming in the digestive tract. So it's just from a slightly different place as well. So what about identifying the different types of pearls that we've just talked about? We've talked about natural, cultured, and imitation. So today, because the imitation can be so convincing, it's difficult. But of course, between natural and cultured, it's even more difficult because that outer coating, the outer structure, is the same. So one of the ways we could identify is by taking them to a proper gemmological laboratory, and then they will do some X-ray on the pearls. And if they were to X-ray, they would be able to see the difference of the internal structure, whether it started from a very tiny little nucleus or whether it has the large pigtoclam nucleus that is typical of cultured pearls. That would be very, very clear, as you can see on this picture. we can't tell ourselves by cutting them. I've heard somebody once say, oh, you just cut the pearl in half and tell. That would be a sin, to cut the pearl and then find out it's a natural pearl. So definitely don't risk doing something like that. Another possibility is the imitation is to use something that's called a tooth test. And the tooth test is very simple. I can do it on my pearls right here. You can just take the pearl in your fingers, bring it up to your teeth, and across the teeth here, you can just rub very gently. And as you rub and as they go across your teeth very lightly, you can actually feel the surface of the pearl. If the pearls are gritty, like rubbing a little piece of sandpaper across your teeth, then the likelihood is they are either natural or cultured. If they are very smooth, it's a bit like if you were to take a drinking glass, and rub it against your tooth. It's going to feel very smooth. So when you feel very smooth, then it's either glass or ceramic or plastic typically. And this is a test that's been used over many, many years, and people still use it today. It's okay to do that test if you do it properly and if you're not rubbing the pearls really hard. But I've had a lot of questions. People always ask me, should I go into a jewelry store and start rubbing pearls against my teeth? And the answer is, of course not. We don't need to test in a jewelry shop, because you just need to ask the jeweler or the people behind the counter, what kind of pearls are these? And they will be happy to tell you all about the pearls. That's why they're there. The place where you might need to do a tooth test, in fact, there are two possibilities. What if you're not going to a good reputable jeweler and you're buying from some kind of marketplace? So there's plenty of marketplaces and pearl markets, etc. With pearl markets, if they're little stalls, they're likely to be here today and gone tomorrow. So that's the kind of place that, yes, absolutely, you can do your tooth test to check. Of course, you can always ask them, do you mind if I do a tooth test? So if they don't know what the tooth test is, or if they say, no, you can't, then obviously there's something wrong there. But in general, the tooth test is not going to hurt your pearls at all. The other time when you should do a tooth test is when you've got the pearls that have been handed down from your mother, or from your grandmother to your mother, or so on and so forth. Because then, rather than take them to the lab and spend a lot of money, if you do a quick tooth test first, you could quite quickly identify whether they were imitation or not. You're not going to be able to tell whether they're natural or cultured, because they will feel the same on the teeth. So, that being said, I hope that helps a little bit, and that'll help some of you to identify some of your pearls at home, or at least identify if they are imitation or not.
Tanja, thank you very much for that fascinating tour of the world of gemstones and jewelry. That left us with a tremendous amount of information, and I think an excitement to go off and start looking at the jewelry pieces that we own, or when we're next out shopping for jewelry, better understanding the gemstones that are out there. Now, if you'd like to know a little bit more about gemstones and jewelry, let me tell you a little bit about the Jewelry Design and Management International School, because we are the only school in Singapore specialized in jewelry education, and we are your best option if you want to get to know more about gemstones, about designing jewelry, about manufacturing jewelry, or basically about anything related to the jewelry industry. So what is JDMIS? We are a private educational institution based in Singapore, and we've been operating since 2007. Now, as a school, we have an established curriculum with certification courses for specific skills competencies, with diploma courses for people that need a more comprehensive qualification. But we've actually been training the jewelry industry and jewelry artisans here in Singapore since 1987. And we're an integral part of the jewelry industry in the region. We have a unique approach to training that makes us your best option if you're interested to get to know more about gemstones and jewelry. So let me share with you some of the interesting elements of our training programs. First of all, our instructors. Now, I'm sure you've gotten the feeling that Tanja is a very knowledgeable and capable instructor in the field of gemstones and jewelry, which absolutely she is. She has 30 years of experience training in design and gemstone knowledge. But in fact, all of our instructors are experienced professional trainers, and they have industry experience. So we don't bring in trainers that haven't actually used their skills. All of our trainers are actually part-time trainers that are using their skills commercially and then coming to share their experiences and their passion with our students and our graduates. That makes a huge difference to us. We also have really small class sizes because we're doing mostly hands-on programs. And if you're doing hands-on training, you don't want to have 20 people in a class. You don't even want to have 15 people in a class. You need personal attention. And so typically our courses will have 8 to 10 people in a class. Another thing that's really interesting is